are happy at work. And
Sorry, I forgot to do that.
no worries. And you're also able to perform better too. So that's why diversity is so important, because it's actually scientifically proven to be effective in a TE sense. So I will bring up my presentation. This will be an interactive session, so I'll be asking for audience participation at certain parts too. Cool. So using type to create a more inclusive and diverse world. And so for those who don't know about me, I have a YouTube channel and I have a series called Type Talks. And I've done over 500 hours of interviewing, over 1,500 hours of coaching, and my YouTube channel's got over 1 million views, and I reached 10K subscribers. So huzzah to that. And so I wanted to start off this presentation with a quote. In embracing the diversity of human beings, we'll find a surer way to true happiness. So my mission in life is to understand why people do what they do, and typology aids me in this. By honoring individual differences and celebrating the diversity in others, it creates the path to happier relationships and a more fulfilling life. And so some of us get into typology because we have ugly duckling syndrome. We feel like we are different than our environment and that our strengths and our gifts are not valued around us. And there's a link that I have below, and it's an article on the INFJ being the ugly duckling, but really you can apply it to any type that is living in an environment where you're not the dominant preferences, and people don't really see your preferences as valid. And so what type helps us with is going from odd duck to rare bird. And so this is a quote in a story from Carol Linden, the president of APTI, and it shows her story of appreciating her natural strengths. She says, as an ENFP, I found myself for a large part of my life feeling like an odd duck. I was different from most people, certainly all of my family, in ways that I could not understand, yet at times excruciatingly felt. I was different, yet always wanting to find where I fit in and could feel true belonging. I wanted to feel I could be my whole, unvarnished self, and at the same time feel accepted and understood. That happened for me when the first time at the age of 34, when I found myself in a bookstore reading David Kiersey's Please Understand Me Too. For the first time in my life, I felt seen and understood for who I truly, deeply was. Kiersey made me feel I was not just an oddity, I was a known entity, and others like me existed. On that day, I was transformed from an odd duck to a rare bird. It feels so much better to be rare than odd. And so when we figure out that there's this archetype that is able to understand our experiences, such as ENFP, it is very relieving because it gives you a sense of, oh, that's what it was. I'm not crazy. And you get the sense of camaraderie with something bigger than yourself, that this pattern has existed before you and will exist after you, almost like you're a part of something bigger than yourself. And so it gives you the sense of humility of, wow, what what a big thing to fit into, and wow, I can't believe there's a place for me in this earth. So a question I would ask you guys is, what environments have you been in that didn't suit your natural preferences? So I'm just going to ask for people to raise their hand and share a little short snippet, if they'd like, about themselves in places that they didn't feel like they fully fit in. So does anyone want to share? And I'll give it a few seconds, and then I'll share, and then and so times that I've been in places where I haven't had my natural preferences being met is I have an ISTJ stabilizer dad, and I have a ESFP improviser mother. And so oftentimes when I felt like I was analyzing something or trying to understand something, my ESFP mother would be like, why are you thinking when you could be doing things, like as in just taking action, and extroverted sensing just doing it. So there's places where I felt like my natural preferences didn't fit in to the environment, But yeah, anyone want to share a short story? I'll let
I'll
anyone of
go.
you. Okay, yeah.
Okay, so I'm an INTP and I spent many years working in corporate sales. So a couple of those were prior to discovering personality type, and so I think that's quite a clear-cut example, really, of just brushing up against a lot of TE, a lot of FE, a lot of sensing. And this is my early 20s as well, so I hadn't really brought on my own tertiary and inferior so much. So yeah, that's about it really.
Yeah, that's a good example. So, thank you for that. And I will go to the next question on this. Oh, yep.
If you'd like, I can
Feel free
share.
to
Yeah.
share. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was raised in a household where everyone oriented FETI, and I was the sole TEFI orient. And I was also raised in a religion which I interpret as being very FETI oriented. Yeah.
Mm,
And and any sort of like FI that deviated from what God wanted you to do, it was perceived as some sort of sin, or as, as something that needed to be controlled, or sort of like kept in a corner in a box. Yeah. So yeah, that's
yeah. And I appreciate the sense of camaraderie of sharing our places where we felt like we were the odd ducks. So thank you, Nathan, and thank you, INTP volunteer. And I shall reshare my screen. And so the next question I have for you guys is, what environments have you been in that did suit your natural preferences? So where are places where you felt home, that you felt safe to be yourself? And I can share first to instigate the sharing circle. So places where I have felt at home is I had a ENFP best friend for a period of my life, and it was really nice in the sense that we would have riveting conversations every time we would meet. Like we'd talk endlessly until we would go to bed, but then like we would have to instigate a shut up time so that we wouldn't keep talking because she could go on forever with the extroverted intuition. But it really did feel like a home in a sense because I could be myself unadulterated with my thoughts just there, and she accepted it. So, does anyone want to share places they feel in flow, that they're able to be in flow? Yeah, John and David.
So places where I can do research and then talk about it, which is quite handy because that's what I tend to do. So it's a
Mm,
combination of introverted thinking and then letting it all out, then go back and sitting quietly somewhere. It's quite nice.
yeah, that sounds nice indeed. And David?
Yeah, when I was in college, I spent the first couple of years at a state university, and then I spent the second couple of years at the University of Illinois. So a little bit more of there was a real intellectual kind of focus, and just, I mean, we talk about rare birds or odd birds, but you could look around campus and see people who were characters and who were like stroking their beard, professors who would stroke their beard and be thinking. You could see them just pulling these ideas out of their brain, and I was in flow. I was just like, this is where I wanted to be, versus some real practical focus on what needs to get done in the present moment.
Yeah, you can ideate in all your freedom.
Yeah. And then also, Joyce, I may have missed it. What are your type preferences?
I have INFJ type preferences.
Okay. Lovely. Thank you.
Yeah. And Nathan?
yeah. So I've had moments in my life where I felt, really belonging, and like, let's say, games nights that I would have with some friends or conversations with friends. I don't know if I can think of any space where I felt like I really belong. And that's sort of like why I'm so passionate about like what I do, because I are in spaces like this where we can create these sorts of environments. Yeah. Um, Although I will check my own ego. I may be over dramatizing my own life situation, or my ego is trying to. I will give that little caveat.
Yeah, that's really self-aware of you, Nathan. And so our minds do have selective memory, so we don't pay attention to all of life. We just pay attention to the moments that leave impressions on us, that strike how we feel on some deep level. So we all have FI, regardless of whether or not we're FI users, because things stick with us and things don't. And so, Phoebe, I saw you unmute, but I could have imagined that. So, oh, you're muted now. So,
yes. Well, that was in answer to the first question because, this one, it's only in the type community do I feel comfortable these days, because I'm in STJ environment for the most part, and haven't really found my way in. But my answer to your first question was, I was in a leadership position for a homeowners association, where I was supposed to know the rules and abide by the rules, and that was so not me that it was just not comfortable. So
yeah, rule following and EPs, so ENFP, ENTP, ESFP, ESTP are like, rules. Ooh, those strict things to do. And so, yeah, thank you for that example. And does anyone else want to share before we move on? I'll give it 3 seconds. All right, I shall go back to my presentation. And so another quote is, diversity is the one true thing we all have in common. Celebrate it every day. And so as you see here, especially in this space, we all have moments where we felt different than the typical person there. And so we share diversity. What a sweet thing. And so life is a game of broken telephone. When we try to communicate a message to others and share our realities, a portion of it always gets lost in translation. Our deepest realities don't look as we would like them to the other person receiving it, and vice versa. We talk past each other. Our differences are magnified and made more obvious when we get into fights with others and start playing broken telephone. These things that we say or do are not taken in the way that we intended. And I'm sure the INTPs in the audience, they've said a TI truth, which is just, okay, I know truth has a weird connotation because some people don't like that associated with TI. But so TI users, they say information, that they just mean it as information to the other person. And then the other person takes it personally. And then the INTP's like, I'm just saying information. Why is this person getting offended? Or taking it not in the way that you meant for them to take it, which is as something to inform them with. So I was just giving an example of how we play broken telephone with each other. And so neurodiversity is rampant. Thus, because of the differences in how we operate, we may either feel superior to others, my way of approaching the situation is the best, or inferior, I suck in comparison to others, but in reality, most of the time, we are just uniquely different. And so, for instance, when we feel superior to others, it might be a moment where our strengths are more suited in a situation. And when we feel inferior to others, it might be a place where, like, let's say, if I was an ESFP made to do the same exact thing every single day, I'd feel like I suck in comparison to others because I'm like, I can't focus. It's treachery. So when we're living from the parts of us that are not as natural all the time, we might feel like, why is it so easy for everyone else, but it's so hard for me? And so there's this quote, if you try to get a fish to climb up a tree, it'll think its whole life thinking it's stupid, or it'll die because the fish can't be outside of water. But you get the sentiment that when we're put into situations where we're almost set up to fail or expected to perform as well as a person where it's their natural strength, we might develop inferiority complexes or superiority complexes based on how easy something is for us too. So often unseen, neurodiversity is rampant. It's a part of the human experience and is often overlooked and not embraced in a way that helps us accept and understand these differences. Personality models help us understand why certain inner realities we have do not translate to other people as smoothly as we would like. The essence of what we may be trying to communicate may be missing in the other person's perspective. This is where we take into account the concept of neurodiversity. even though human beings speak the same language literally, we have difficulty understanding each other on a core level. The beauty of the world lies in the diversity of its people. And so you see in this photo that it's skin color differences, which is diversity in this sense. And so some forms of diversity you can see externally, such as your skin color, and other forms of diversity are hidden, such as neurodiversity. You can't see if someone's brain is wired differently unless you give them a brain scan or some other thing to look at the activity. Otherwise, people assume that you're just like them because on the surface, your skin bag is resembling their skin bag. So they assume that there's some sort of sameness when we're really much different. And so when we get misinterpreted enough, we may build, as I talked about earlier, inferiority complexes, feeling not good enough. As such, many struggle with vulnerability because we know when we are transparent with our thoughts and feelings, it can be misinterpreted and met with judgment. When we don't feel seen, heard, and understood on a deeper level, we can unintentionally start creating false narratives about ourselves that cause us to feel not good enough. And so when we feel like we're not being seen on the level that we want to, we start to assume that the problem is us. We either blame others or we blame ourselves. And if we go the self route, then it can create self-esteem issues. Over time, viewing ourselves as not good enough can harm our inner dialogue. If we are in environments that do not promote us to see ourselves favorably, then we can develop ideas about ourselves that can be harmful towards our self-esteem. And so this is the science behind our self-talk. Since 95% of our thoughts are repetitive, it is important for us to monitor the things that affect our inner voice. So according to the National Science Foundation, 80% of our thoughts are negative, and 95% of our thoughts are repetitive. And so imagine having a negative tape in your head replaying 95% of the time. So that's why it's so important to monitor the inner ecosystem of your own thoughts and voices to yourself, because that can really affect you over time. And so the quote I have here is, don't be a victim of negative self-talk. Remember, you are listening to your own self. And so my question to everyone, and you don't have to answer this because this is kind of personal, what percentage of your thoughts are positive or negative? Yeah, so I can share as voluntary first sharer. I think I do fit the statistic that I do think 80% of my thoughts are either critiquing or they're more on the negative side or neutral side. But yeah. So I was like really astounded at that study done, because it really goes to show, while everyone is fighting their own internal struggle, and if the external world is pushing on you and you're already pushing on yourself, then you're being double crushed by your own pressure and by the societal pressure too. Which, if you enjoy being a pancake, that's fine, but you don't want to be crushed on a daily basis. But yeah, I will move on to the next slide, just because I realized that this question might be a little bit more personal. And so something that we can take to be more aware of how we treat other people is Linda Barron's. She talks about the concept of BLM, which now has a different connotation, Black Lives Matter, but let's just look at it in this context, be like me. So it's when we try to get other people to be more like us, because we see our way of being the superior way of doing things. And BLT, which also has a different meaning, but a more delicious meaning, bacon, lettuce, tomatoes. No, just take it within the context of Linda Barron's, be like them. So what be like them is essentially, we feel pressure to be like other people, peer pressure, or we feel inferior to other people. So we feel like we have to conform to their way of doing things. So I will go on to the next slide. Projection. So projection is a really Jungian concept, and Carol Shumate really does this justice. She says, or Jung says, we project onto others because they are different from us. When we expect someone to be like us, we diminish the other person and it doesn't allow them to access their greatest strengths. Carl Jung refers to this as projection of the shadow, which is the externalization of the unconscious parts of yourself onto your social environment. These unconscious ideas, needs, and feelings we are not aware of having become cognitive distortions and cause us to judge other people. You see this with managers hiring people similar to them, or your parents wanting you to be more like them. We often like those who are more similar to us. There's the similar to us bias out there, even because we may appreciate people who function like us because there's less struggle in our interaction because they just get you because they are like you. But similarity leads to comfort, and comfort can make us turn away from those different than us and leads us to shut down the potential that diversity could bring. And so something important to remember is everyone else is not a broken version of you. They are just fundamentally different than you. And that's why type is so great, because it gets you to see they're different, not broken. And you're different and not broken. I was about to say you're broken and not different, but that that's me articulating. All right, so when is the last time you've experienced BLM, be like me, wanting someone to be like you, or BLT, feeling the pressure to be someone else?
As an ENFP, whenever I meet new people, I am naturally trying to bridge and get to know them, and I find that if I like the person, there's something in me trying to find the connect, why we are similar, and my language even betrays that. That so I kind of always celebrate when out loud when there are similarities. So yeah, that's my experience. Especially when I like somebody, I really want to be like them or them like me. So there's a connection.
Yeah, they call it the NF phenomenon of masquerading. So NFs value authenticity, but paradoxically, they can also want to masquerade themselves to be like the other person because they're willing to sacrifice themselves for connection or that greater potential of the relationship. So yeah, well, really good example. And anyone else want to share?
Well, I think it's interesting as you get into type. I think that both of those kind of get at a distance. Like you start to just appreciate other people for their strengths and not try to push onto them your own types. The one piece that does seem to come around with David Kiersey's original book about Please Understand Me. Like, I think there's that wish that people would understand type and be able to reciprocate an understanding attitude rather than just assuming like, all right, like this is how it is and you're supposed to do that or it's bad. It's like, well, there's options. There's other ways of looking at it. So it's a value of understanding typology to I think, step away from that over time.
That is true, yeah. Thank you for that different angle of it. Extroverted intuition is very good at seeing a different angle of the thing itself. So yeah. There was a time where I also felt pressure to be like other people. And I think it's in most contexts where I think it's just easier. So sometimes when people use very concrete language, I'll try to meet them where they're at and I'll change my natural dialect to go concrete. But what will happen is I have to translate everything that's vague into concrete. And then for me to then want to understand it again, I have to change it back to vague. And so sometimes I'll mess up with certain concrete sentences that are very simple for other people, but it's because I'm doing this language conversion in my head. I'm taking it from concrete to, no wait, from abstract to concrete to abstract to then think about what I think of it. Whereas the person just hears this little thing I'm saying and they're like, you didn't even get that concrete thing you said, right? And it's like, because I'm trying to speak your language and my language at the same time. And it's doing a lot. I think sometimes people call it code switching, or changing dialects is when you have to change your mother tongue for another person all the time. And so they don't realize the amount of exertion it takes. Like for me, the example is I have to change my dialect like 3 times to be able to say a simple sentence to them, which confuses people because it's easy for them to just speak in concrete and that's it. Whereas, yeah, David, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, no, I think there's so much to that, and similarly, like there's that ability I have to go into a feeling mode, to understand values and emotions, and oftentimes what you get after all that work is this kind of like, wow, like you've started to get here, like you're starting to be on board, and we've got a long way to go, and you're feeling like, man, I'm at the limit of what I can do to get. And it gives you some empathy for other folks who are like, wow, like they're trying to have abstract theoretical understandings, and they're kind of getting there. To just give them the space and be like, wow, that's really good, and not be like, oh, well, let me dump the rest of the theory on you and crush you. But yeah, that whole piece of extending yourself out is a challenge. But one of the things I get out of the typology is that we share pieces with everybody. And so, if I can share introversion or a perceiving function or some piece, to try to focus on that, rather than focusing on the differences, it's been really valuable.
Yeah, I totally agree. Focusing on similarities can really help build that sense of camaraderie. And to go back to the note of the energy expensiveness of needing to switch from your natural default mode is, in a lot of places they talk about how when you switch doing certain activities, it actually causes fatigue with you. It's context switching fatigue. So you could even see this in the context of type. When you have to use preferences that aren't as natural for you, you can do it. It's just expensive in the sense that, just like people say multitasking isn't efficient. Like if you do one task at a time, it's actually better for your brain because it's less expensive, as in like when you're switching between tasks, it causes your brain to get more tired. In the same time that you have to switch dialect for another person, it causes that same stamina reduction you could see too. So yeah, Catherine Hirsch.
Just to piggyback off what you just said, Joyce, I think one of the other issues we have when we don't feel like we fit in is part of our energy is used up trying to figure out, well, how am I going to fit in? What are the stereotypes these people hold about me that I want to be careful not to confirm? And because we're so busily worrying about the impression we're making, we don't have the energy to make the best impression that we could. A lot of times when we're in new environments or places where we're just learning, our learning actually gets blocked by our own worries about how we're being perceived, and trying to prove those things wrong actually leads us to maybe even reinforce them. And sometimes I think it can also work if we know a positive stereotype, that we work really hard to live up to it and spend a lot of energy that, again, is not authentic and doesn't allow us to use what we are strong and good at its best.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's the paradox of self-consciousness. So in a sense, when we try hard to be someone else, we take away from our natural shine, which is us being ourselves. And you could even see this in an NF light too. So I find that your soulmate can recognize you when you actually give out your essence. So when you hide your own self by being more like other people, what will happen is the people who are naturally drawn to you won't be able to notice you. So you're wearing camouflage. And so in a sense, you're doing a disservice to your soulmate or your soulmates, with an S, because your friends can be soulmates, or someone who, like, I define soulmate as someone you're highly compatible with, right? And so you're doing a disservice to the people who may love you the most as you are. And there are a lot of INTPs in the audience, so I wonder if INTPs have a slant towards diversity and inclusion. There's no backing behind that. I'm I'm just speaking out of nothing right now. But I was wondering, does anyone else want to add to the experiences of when they've gone through Be Like Me or Be Like Them? I'll give it a few seconds.
I'll go, Joyce, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think I spent the majority of my adult life in a Be Like Them space, to the point where I was exhausted every single day pushing down my dominant function because I felt that it was too childish and came across too chaotic and random to people. And so I felt like I was constantly getting the professional reputation as a chaotic, scattered person who didn't know how to be a professional. And I took that feedback. Instead of working with it in a more positive way, I just decided to be somebody completely different. And I had no idea until I started working with type how much energy I was expending day in and day out trying to be like my coworkers and trying to push all of that energy down. And type gave me the gift of being able to be myself for the first time in my adult life. And I feel like I have a second coming, like a second life, because I feel so much more energetic and like myself. And I'm so much more willing to connect with people and honor their diversity, what they bring into the room, what they bring into the table. I'm so excited to discover and collaborate with them because I have so much more energy. It's fascinating and beautiful. And I just want this gift for everybody. So thank you for presenting and bringing this to light.
Yeah, that was beautiful, Selu. So you mentioned a few salient points, and one of them is it takes a lot of energy to be who you're not. And so that's a quote from somewhere. And also that when your needs are met, you're able to give more to other people. So you're actually feeling more energized and more generous when you're able to honor your own diversity, because you don't feel tired and grumpy all the time. And so you're actually able to love others better because your cup is full, and from a place of overflowing of your cup, you're able to give on to others. Whereas if you give to others, but your cup is empty, it can cause a resentment or a inner grumpiness that, hey, there's a survival instinct within everyone where if our needs aren't met first, we'll feel hesitant to want to give to other people. There'll be a stinginess because we don't feel like we have what we need to survive on a very fundamental animal level. And so when we get that covered, we're able to give from a place of love. At least that's my NF idealism, right? And then you can see that however you'd like. But yeah, does anyone else want to share before we move on? All right, then I shall head off. All right, so we take things personally when things don't go well or people criticize us for not being like them. And so when we look at someone and when they aren't like us, on the other hand, and fail to meet our expectations, we may say to ourselves, why are you being so purposefully difficult? Why can't you be more like this instead? They don't even care, when this is not true. So, like, I'm thinking about, so an ISTJ and an ENFP, let's have a hypothetical situation. They're at work and the ISTJ sees the ENFP trying something new at work. And it's like, hey, this might be a different way of doing this task. Whereas the ISTJ is like, are you purposefully trying to be difficult by causing this task to be a new task when you could just do it the way we've been always doing it? And then you create this hidden judgment within people where one person is like, why are you purposefully being difficult? And then the other one's like, why are you not doing it this way? And so broken telephone, right? It goes back to that. So The Four Agreements is a really popular book. And one of the agreements is don't take anything personally, because much of our suffering comes from taking things personally. Because because a lot of the pain we experience is the inner dialogue in our head, the residual dialogue that is left from an event. So it's not really the event itself usually that harms us. It's the inner talk it creates inside us that is the actual pain. And so when we learn to not take things personally, easier said than done, right? it actually eliminates most of our suffering, which is why a lot of religious beliefs or spiritual practices involve when you detach from things, it causes you less suffering because it's the personal element. When you start to tie things to a deficiency in your inherent nature or something on your part, it causes a huge amount of inner turmoil that is preventable. So you suffer 1,000 times in your mind and 1 time from the actual event. So what's helped me with not taking things personally is telling myself, it's not personal, it's a pattern. Oftentimes we take things personally when it's just a pattern. So you could see a lot of things as, so let's take, for example, an INFP and an ENTJ. So the ENTJ says something really blunt about the INFP's beliefs, or like maybe the INFP really likes Reiki and the ENTJ is like, I don't know, man. I don't know how I feel about Reiki. And the INFP takes that personally because it's like, how can you not care about this value or belief that I have? When we realize that it's not personal, it's a pattern, like it's likely for NT types to be questioning of things that NF types might be more readily incorporate into their values, it can cause a disconnect. So we can see how certain conflicts that are in our life are not caused by us and our inherent deficiency per se, but it's just a pattern that happens to people who play into the pattern. So it's explainable and it's not personal because it doesn't have to do with you. It has to do with a larger or overarching thing, such as the person's personality type or their environmental influences or whatever pattern that they're playing into. And so this is a great note to self. Even when it seems personal, rarely do people do things because of you. They do things because of them. You know, this is true. You may not be able to control all the things people say or do to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. And so most things people do is because of them and because of their patterns. And oftentimes people aren't thinking about you, they're thinking about them. So most things aren't personal, and if they're personal, they're just slightly personal. So I'm wondering, what are everyone else's techniques on not taking things personally? How do you detach yourself when you're feeling a little bit hurt by what someone else did?
I have one thing to say about this.
Yeah.
What I tend to do is notice how that person reacts to other people. So that's something I started doing a few years ago. And then I notice, oh, actually, that person is like that with him as well. And she's also like that with her and with her. It's not like she's just behaving like that with me. So if I think, oh, she always looks at me strange, or, she always acts like that with me, or she's always very blunt, then I notice her behaving like that with other people. And then I remember it's not just with me, it's just her, it's how she behaves. So that really helps me.
Yeah, it's not that they're purposefully having a vendetta against you and want to hit at all your soft spots. They're just a naturally blunt person, which they could work at, but it's it's a pattern, not personal attack.
Yeah,
That's a good example, Rowan.
Thank you.
Joyce?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to wrestle with kind of a complicated thought around this. I don't know if you've seen any of Michael Jordan's videos, his life story, or whatever, but you notice sometimes like he's got this maxim, this quote that comes out where he says, well, Clyde Drexler said this thing to me about how we were kind of, both of us are really, great athletes. And then Jordan's like, well, I took that kind of personally. And he uses it as a motivation to win championships. And so like, I think there is some positive piece to it. And what I take from that is, Jung had this idea of the persona, which is kind of this outer facade, this face, when you think about like, oh, don't attack someone's face. Like there is this piece out there that I think maybe you can use, but there's this other side from Jungian psychology of the inner self. And so I think if you can distinguish a little bit, be like, well, yeah, like I'm taking some offense and I'm gonna like respond, but to have this other sense of like, but at a certain level, it's not really me. Like there's this outer version that I'm kind of playing a game of responding, but not letting it sink into the heart and have you feel devalued about it. Be like, oh man, the self-talk's like, man, I really am less of a player or less of a thing. So I don't know. I've been kind of struggling with that piece around the persona, the face, and Jungian psychology is very much kind of dismissive of the persona, whereas in truth, like it is kind of half of us. Like there is this outer engagement with everything, but I just think it's important that people also have that inner peace and that inner peace in both senses, PEACE and PIECE.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, David. There's a quote about how what hardens an egg, like you boil an egg in water, softens a potato. And so taking things personally for one person could be advantageous, and for the other person could ruin their entire lives. So I find that some people are motivated by conflict. They like to be offended because it gives you something. We work harder by contrast. So let's say someone has horrible parents. Someone can either absolve every morning, I do not want to be my parents, and that can actually skyrocket them towards success. You can see Tony Robbins as an example of this. So his mother was heavily abusive, and he used that abuse to propel him into the person he is today. And then some people are abused, and then that will ruin their whole life. They'll get addicted to stuff, and then they won't make anything out of their lives too. So it's all dependent. So I do find when we take things personally, it will show parts of our inner self. So there's a quote about how when you knock into someone's their cup, whatever spills out is their inner contents. So external events, they knock on our inner contents. And so whatever comes out of that, coffee, water, like our pain or our motivation to work better, it shows a little bit of our personality. So external events amplify certain things that exist within ourselves.
Yeah, I love that piece. Thank you.
Cool. And so does anyone else have ways to not take things personally? I'll give it a few seconds. Yep.
But Joyce, I try not to take things personally, more so than I look at things that are happening to me or things that people say or whatever in an introspective way, in terms of what do I need to learn from this. And so, if there's something being said that is helpful for me to learn, I need to learn. But if there's nothing, if it's just their stuff or their patterns or whatever, I need to let go and give it back to them. I mean, to not take it on, in other words.
Yeah, that's a very mature way of looking at it, that what can I learn from this is a brilliant way of going forward from something that might hurt you, because it's striking something in you. So everything in the outer world is a mirror to your internal self. So it's striking a thing that can provide you a deeper mirror into your own psyche. So beautifully put. So I will reshare my presentation. And so I'm just going to go to the next slide. There's a saying, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I think this relates back to diversity and inclusion, because when we learn that people are different than us, and that's okay, before we get angry at them or before we get hurt by them, there's the like we'll still get that initial hurt just because we're human, and it might take a while for us to understand on an instinctive level that people are different. But it allows us that space from that hurt and that reaction to choose how we're going to view the situation. So whereas your natural autopilot might have been, oh, I'm hurt by this, I'm going to feed into my inner dialogue of how I'm not good enough or how I hate the other person and they suck. You might take a step to think about, oh, I'm going to choose the path of understanding and love, that I can see why they did it. I may not agree, but it has nothing to do with me and it's their own journey. Or maybe it says something about how I should grow as a person too. But it allows us to change, our mindset changes can allow us to change how we approach a situation. And so something that we can learn from this all is that we're good enough as we are. Of course, we can always grow. So there's an even better version of who we are, but at a base level, we are good enough. And so personality frameworks provide us the reassurance that we are not crazy for being different than those around us. They help us truly honor the neurodiversity within the human population. We can utilize typology to create a greater sense of love, belonging, and acceptance in both the world around us and in ourselves. Type gives us a language to help us love others better. A lot of people use the term neurodivergent today. I believe when we are a personality type that is in the minority, we can be considered neurodivergent in that context. Figuring out which of the 16 types we are has a lot of explanatory power. The beauty of learning about this system is that it can make us feel understood and give us a sense of relief that it is okay to be you, perhaps for the first time in your life. Personality type gives us the reminder that we can think differently than one another, and that's okay. We don't need to be like someone else to be worthwhile. We are good enough as we are. And so I have a photo there that it says new mindsets equal new result. And I really do believe that when we change the way that we think, we can change the way that we behave. And so that's why I believe learning about these concepts, learning about whatever realm of type that you care about, helps us with having new results in our life in a TE way or in an FE way, right? It helps you with whatever results you want. It might not even be related to a cognitive function, but we're always seeking to become a more self-actualized version of ourselves, or at least the people here are. So I think that learning about personality type, as you all know about, gives us the tools to become more self-actualized. I've always felt like in my life that for the Maslow hierarchy of needs, there's a pyramid, and I always felt like my pyramid was upside down. I felt like my self-actualization need was first, and everything else was optional, even if it wasn't optional. And so I've always been fascinated with things that can amplify our self-actualization as human beings. And type, if used properly, can really do that for us. And so companies that embrace diversity and inclusion in all aspects of their business statistically outperform their peers. So that's a little bit of workplace or TE motivation to include diversity and inclusion. So how could you apply what you've learned today? I am just going to toss the question back to everyone. What are ways you use type to become more diverse and to become more inclusive in your everyday life or in your work life?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief because I've been talking too much. But one piece that just jumps out to me is I'm in Portland, Oregon, we're a very liberal city, and there's a lot about diversity and inclusion, but it's mostly that circle of hands that you had, which was colors and genders and stuff. They just feel like emphasizing the value of type diversity is something that I'll probably kind of frame maybe in that light as a result of today's presentation. So thank you.
Awesome. What was everyone's biggest takeaway? Oh yeah, John?
I was about to say neurodiversity is something we get asked a lot about. And sometimes it's a somewhat single point, like, what type are neurodiverse people or something ludicrous. But it strikes me, and this is not directly from what you said, but there's some ideas in there that I need to go away and think about for 5 years, but might help me to reframe the issue a little bit and turn it around. So it's a starting point for thinking about things, which is always nice.
It is, yeah. It's the starting point of having more information of how to treat each other or how to orient yourself in a situation. Yeah. It's a good talking point too. So diversity is a great, or type theory is a great way to start the most deepest conversations of your life. So you might have this one talking point from type, and then from that, people actually have a safe place to talk about themselves, because it's easier for people to talk about themselves when they're able to identify as their type, so they can speak behind the gauze of their type while still being honest. So it provides people honesty with protection.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that, and of all, most of what you said is stuff we would do anyway, is just in the context of diversity, and particularly neurodiversity, it provides a way of turning the conversation around, which would be useful in all sorts of ways.
Absolutely.
I'm not enunciating it very clearly because I haven't thought it through very clearly yet, but it's all bubbling away.
No, it was all good insight. And Catherine Hirsch, I saw you unmute. Did you want to say anything?
I think one of the pieces that, because type's about patterns, that it helps us to remember to be curious, to ask questions, to hold things very gently and loosely, to try not to go into the be like me, be like them, and instead to be curious and open. And that always ends up making much more room, not only for other people, but for ourselves. Because I think recognizing there are parts of ourselves that we don't always own or love can be very, very powerful way to then do much more to help other people to recognize that that bit of self-love and self-compassion is something they brings them into the world of diversity just as much as doing that for others. And maybe that's an introvert's point of view here.
That it's good. We need that self-reflection. So yeah, that's beautiful. Diversity or type is a reminder to be curious, because oftentimes we go through life and we might meet something with judgment rather than curiosity. So type is that extra layer of, you could be curious in this way about someone or yourself. Instead of judging yourself or judging others, you can be curious about yourself or about others. Yeah, that's great.
I had a client once who said, you know, there are very few people who are the 17th type, the JERK. Most people are just being authentically who they are. And that rubs up against you because there are 15 other types, and the likelihood that you're always meeting people who are just like you is, well, pretty small, except for maybe this session where there are a lot of INTPs.
Yeah. What is a JERK? Is it just like a fake type code to be the 17th?
It's just
there's an English version which is an ARSE.
Yeah. So it's just someone who's a jerk or an off.
Yeah, it's true.
Dominic Raab, maybe.
Oh, you had to bring it in, Sarah. You had to. You couldn't stop yourself. And there's so many Americans on the call. They're wondering, who the hell is he? As will we be shortly, hopefully.
Yeah. Sorry, very UK joke.
Yeah. Yeah. Most people don't wake up in the morning wanting to piss you off. Like, their intention isn't, I'm gonna piss off Catherine today. It's just they probably are doing it unintentionally. Or there are small cases where they actually do it on purpose, but those are for another time. And so I'm gonna just continue on. Oh wait, did I share my screen? I was about to just present to myself. It would have been a really lonely presentation. All right. So the last quote I have is, when everyone is included, everyone wins. So this is a part of the NF mentality of wanting that win-win solution, that potential ideal solution for people's relationships, that, oh, you know, if everyone was able to understand each other, then we'd be able to love each other, which may be idealistic and unpractical, but in my mind seems totally possible. And so, yeah, and this presentation was to inspire a world where everyone wins. Because we have so much win-lose or lose-lose in the world, where one party wins or neither of the party wins, such as fights between couples where both couples go and they have the fight, but then they become more distant to each other because of it. I would want a world where people, they talk with each other, and the talks with each other bring us closer to each other rather than create a rift. So yeah. Any questions, comments, concerns? This is, yeah, the last slide. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you very much, Joyce. I'm going to stop recording, I think.